Hello and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Jill Bodensteiner, Director of Athletics at St. Joseph's University. As leaders, it's really important that we're clear regarding our goals and our vision and how those integrate into the greater university goals. We also need to collectively create a strategy and a culture that are going to help us reach our goals. This is an evolving exercise that requires an openness to continuous improvement. That's why I follow the One Question Leadership Podcast, because I love learning as much as I possibly can from my colleagues. That helps me be the best that I can be. So my message for the day, keep learning, keep leading.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at OneQ Leadership. Our guest today is Anthony Azama. Anthony is the Director of Athletics at Washington University in St. Louis. Greetings, Anthony. Thanks for joining us.
I'm excited to be here. This is a great program, and kudos to you, Ty.
Thank you very much. Now, you've been there at WashU in that role since 2017, which I guess it was July, so it's almost 5 years there. Spent time at Columbia, at the Mid-American Conference, Miami, Ohio, Florida Citrus Sports, among other places, with over 25 years in college athletics. And much of your experience, I guess, being in external operations. You've done some revenue generation and a number of other things. So you have a wealth of experience. You are a fan of leadership, which I am too. So I am excited about this conversation. I've heard you talk about what you termed as failure resiliency that student athletes learn while playing sports. And I wonder about that. Give us a little insight on that in terms of student athletes. And the key question here is, how does that translate to the person in the AD chair, that failure resiliency?
You know, for student athletes, they succeed and fail all within a minute of a competition. And you being a former defensive back, you know that you probably spend more time on Sunday film study focusing on the plays that you didn't make versus the plays that you did. And it's really trying to make sure that you continue to remember, what you do well and spend a little bit of time on, what things you can improve. As that translates to the AD chair, to me, first of all, I don't think about life in terms of limits. I think about life in terms of possibilities. And for me, it's not, it is what it is. It's what do we want it to become? So it helps me kickstart the process of reflection and resolution. It's a good practice to review the day and the people that you interact with, because ultimately the goal is to engage, connect, and impact. And that's vital to trying to create a positive culture. But I think you also need to recognize not just the good parts of your day, but also acknowledging where you have fallen short and try to learn from it, assess the consequences, and don't repeat it. But here's another important thing as well. We've got to learn as leaders to give ourselves grace. It's not about being perfect as much as being authentic and being true to our moral compass. Because at the end of the day, we're here to serve others. In order for us to do that, we need to be at our best. So the first part of the process is reflection and resolution. The second part is gratitude, and maybe not the way people have heard it, but I like to keep notes throughout my career on challenging situations. And I, detail those notes out as far as what was the process? How do we determine the options? How do we assess the options? And then what decisions did we make? And then it was information in there that reviewed the impact of those decisions, both on the mission and the values, but also the impact of the project that was at question. Because for me, it shows a testament of perseverance and a level of accomplishment. Going into this pandemic, I was ready to get on a flight to go to Chicago to watch our men's basketball team compete in the Sweet 16. Flight got canceled. Everything started to get canceled. The NCAA tournament, Division I got canceled, and I'm driving back as I'm in the Uber. And, I began to reflect on some other challenges that we've had. And one of the things that I need to make sure I needed to do going into the next challenge is, here's some things that people can count on me for. And that was one of the first things I put in what we sent out in the email, as well as the first virtual meeting that we had. And, one, I'm going to be brutally honest. Two, I'm going to be very transparent. Three, I need everybody to focus on what they can control. And the first thing is attitude, because I'm going to control mine and show up in these spaces with energy and enthusiasm. And then I think the third thing, and I really got vulnerable, and I think I've been able to learn that through the process of evaluating where you think you failed, being vulnerable and making sure people know that you're going to lead with compassion. Because, challenging times and different circumstances affect people and individuals personally and professionally differently, and people process change differently.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that. You immediately spelled out, hey, here's how I'm going to operate. We're going into this crazy pandemic, and I'm going to tell you real quick, here are the three things I'm going to do and how I'm going to operate. So let me set this standard for how we operate as a department. I think that's interesting. You said a couple other things, and I want to follow up on something regarding failure resiliency with student athletes. And also you mentioned in the chair, reconciling what we've done well, reconciling where we need to improve. There's the difference in when you're a student athlete, and you can speak to this being a former athlete yourself. Coaches tend to always coach you up from what you're doing wrong, right? You rarely, depending on the coach, receive a whole lot of kudos for what you're supposed to be doing right. I imagine in the athletics director chair, if you were to take on that mentality of, you could probably be too critical on yourself and lead yourself to some type of mental health issue almost with the pressures and the things you deal with as an athletics director. Tell me about the actual, for the lack of a better term, picking apart the things you probably could do better in a day, in a month, in a year, in a semester, those type of things, how you do it as a leader of an organization.
It gets back to people. And I always look at things in three buckets when I am maybe doing a presentation to the department or in areas that I want to write down how I want to address it going into the day. First, people. Second, resources. And then always keeping an eye on our athletic classrooms, our facilities. But to your question, I think it's an important one. I think sometimes we can focus on our shortcomings too long that can affect how we show up in different spaces. Again, I'm not talking about arrogance on focusing on your strengths, but you have to remember what value you're trying to contribute to the enterprise or to the organization. And with that comes the responsibility of trying to model the way, because leadership is not always meant to be convenient, right? And so how we step into these spaces is critical because people feed off of our energy. I think some folks will say, well, you always have to be on. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think there's times when, especially with your direct reports, when you have those challenging moments and it's appropriate to be vulnerable, and that way they are better able to understand how they can assist you in what you're doing. And then there's other occasions when I think when you've been able to evaluate some things to where you have to show up differently to help different people in your department. And some folks, they are a personality type, and so sometimes that role is playing devil's advocate to vet their ideas. Other folks, they just want to be able to share some ideas or share what's happening in their lives. And I do think as you continue to maneuver through the department, the enterprise, the business that you're running, there are pieces of you that you want to leave with people. And there's so much you can learn from those folks that you're trying to connect with. But specifically, as it pertains to really acknowledging where you've fallen short, to be able to have that as an area of priority going into the next day, or things that you've seen that probably need your attention as well. Because culture and you playing a role in that, not just through emails or from a podium, is so important as you look at and you think about the journey, because that's when I feel like the journey is so much more important than the destination because of what you learn during that process.
Actually, it's very interesting when you talk about the self reflection and not letting that be your driver for the day, meaning like, let's not look at all the challenge areas that we had yesterday and then tomorrow and then the next day all we have on our mind are our challenge areas. We do have to look at where we're doing good, look at our strength, and look at the people around you. And it actually leads me to my next question. What is your process of reconciling the struggle of being a leader, leading a department when you need to be in a moment with people, but you got so many things on your mind and this department is a business and you got to make sure things run how they need to run and keep the focus on the student athletes?
That's a lot to unpack, but it's a really good question. I think preparation is important in how you prepare for the day and making sure you're carving out time to prepare for the day. And one thing that you have to remind yourself being in this position is that the person in front of you doesn't know how many meetings you've had before them or after, right? And they shouldn't. They should feel like they're the only person that matters at that time. You know, when I first took the job here, I shared with student athletes, be where your feet are. These moments go by so fast. And I know you would love to go back and play one more game. We probably wouldn't want to do practices, right? But
Right.
I would love to go back and play one more game. It's be in the moment, because when it's gone and the sweat dries and you got to hang up the jersey, while the stories will alter a little bit as we grow older, there's still a longing to be able to be in that locker room. There's still a longing to be able to compete with those friends, and I think that is something that I carry with me, and it's transition here a little bit to the real world and being in this position. And this is why, like I said before, I embrace the journey and the people that you meet along the way. And I think this really speaks to the fact of, maybe you've heard this before, what got you here won't get you there. So what got me to this point is not what's going to just make me successful. I've got to pivot a little bit, and like you alluded to, I've overseen the external side, which is half of the athletic department. As the athletic director, now you're overseeing the entire athletic department, and there's a difference there in how you need to show up internally and then what needs to be done externally to kind of continue to create that momentum. And it's something that we talk about a lot in our department, especially during this pandemic. Us showing up with the energy and enthusiasm, because that creates the momentum for our staff when they look at and see us not falling victim to the frustration and the fatigue, still being human, of course, and we show that with our actions, not what we say, right? You can't say you're a good teammate. You show that you're a good teammate, and really trying to model that way. That has been something that to me has been very critical in trying to be a good leader, but more importantly, to be a good servant leader.
Right. I imagine it's not easy. I mean, you may have just come out of a meeting where everybody's trying to fight for whatever resources they need to have for whatever part of their organization, and you run into a football player, or you run into a basketball player, or you run into anybody, a woman who works in the department, even just a student on campus, and you got to be in the moment there and not put off what you just went through in this meeting on this person you're meeting right now. That's got to be a challenge. But I think if you're able to do it, you probably get stronger at it. Just like practice, right? If you're able to do that once and you're able to do it twice, you probably get stronger at it.
If there's something I could add, you have to adapt to the situation. Like all politics are local, right? No two campuses, mirror each other. And when you're at a place where relationships are currency, and by that, I mean, even if it takes me 5 minutes to walk from my office across campus to a meeting, I need to leave 15 minutes ahead of time, right? Because the moment you just walk past somebody or you cut the conversation short, that'll get around faster than all the things that you do well, because relationships matter and connecting with people matter. I think when you understand the landscape a little bit and you try to work towards your strengths, you begin to not necessarily wear the job on your face, and you learn a little bit more about how to have a poker face, so to speak.
A term I've heard you use is curriculum of athletics. The curriculum of athletics is what these student athletes get when they're on campus, and how that applies to those outside of athletics, right? In terms of helping them to understand the benefit of being a student athlete and the benefit of athletics on campus. Give me some thought into that. I guess the term you use, the curriculum of athletics on campus, and how it relates to professors on campus who may or may not be sports people, right? Who may or may not, from their lens, understand the value of college athletics to the people who play it, to the university, to the constituency of the university. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I believe that there's many lessons learned through sports and competition. The opportunities that it provides and what it can reveal if you are able to persevere are tremendous. And I'm hopeful that I'm a living example of that. But three that stand out to me and that I always talk about with our student athletes are these transferable skills that I think are just as important today as they were back in 1994 when I started at Vanderbilt. And in no particular order, interpersonal skills, the ability to be able to connect with people who may be different from you. That is a valued skill now more than ever, right? Because we've gone into these echo chambers and we're having hard times listening to people who differ in opinion. But if you take the time, you'll find out that there's probably more opportunities where you intersect than you are different. But I also think it also begins the honing of what I call EQ, emotional intelligence, the ability to learn how to have empathy, right? When I think about the teams that I've been on and the guys that I went through tour days with, it really crystallized a better understanding for me of their why. They knew my why, and there was a connection. There was a bond that was there, right? And even if that meant, hey, they needed a study buddy past midnight, I'm there because I know they would do it for me. And so those interpersonal skills, the organizational skills, and I don't think this should be taken for granted because I think you got to be strategic with your time, especially as a student athlete. That also carries over into life after college. But being able to uh, organize your time really allows you to maximize the spaces you show up in because you're not carrying baggage of maybe things that were left unfinished into the next space. And then the last thing is leadership skills. What value can I bring to the team or the enterprise? I think the athletic curriculum builds student athletes to have the ability to impact the lives around them. And that's both not just from a leader standpoint, but also being a good servant leader and being someone that can listen, follow instructions, and where most people see challenges, usually student athletes, former student athletes see opportunity. How this translates to the world of academia is I want to make sure they understand that we're on two parallel tracks trying to prepare young people within these 4 years for the next 40 years of success, right? I mean, we have young people that's staring down public failure in every competition, but they're learning how to rise and respond with their coach. And, even business professional CEOs have executive coaches. So there's a lot of things that translate back and forth. But one of the reasons why I kind of move forward with that term when I'm in the world of academia, because I understand that most people's understanding of college athletics is either through ESPN or the negative headline. They really don't understand the emotional and mental development. It's not just physical. And the fact that there's so much time that a program is engaged in together, that's more than the outcome on the scoreboard. Like, that's the motivation. And that may be 2, 3 hours of their whole time of preparing for that exam day, if you will, test day, which everybody can review and monitor and critique. That's a little bit different than the person that's in a chemistry lab. And so what we try to do is maybe use some of the same terms and try to relay it when I'm speaking with deans or I'm speaking in front of academia to show that these worlds aren't that much dissimilar. And then when you start to talk about outcomes, and to me, some of the bigger key performance indicators are graduation rate, job placement rate, right? Uh, and GPA. And what we've been fortunate, even during the pandemic, is our student athletes have outpaced the student body. And so that says something, because our student athletes are showing up in these spaces as students, but with the mindset of being ready to compete, because they know that what they're learning, they're getting the best of both worlds, the athletic curriculum and then the world of academia, because the goal is, for them to have a holistic experience, development, to be prepared for the next 40 years of success. And I think research proves that student athletes tend to be a little bit more successful than the student body.
Yeah, which is why we are both in the industry, right? In terms of working with student athletes and people who work in college athletics. I like a lot of things you said there, but in terms of a student athlete, what they learn when they're playing and what they have to apply afterwards, me being a defensive back, right? Accountability. If the defensive line does not put pressure on the quarterback, I am covering way longer than I really want to cover. And so I really have to depend on them to get their job done in order for me to get my job done.
And that is such a great point. And for you and that defensive lineman to understand each other's roles, you've got to connect, right? You've got to have those communication skills to connect. And just as important, I need to know that you're just as invested as I am. So are you showing up on time? Are you showing up the right way? And are you willing to allow me to lead when I'm talking about what the defensive line is trying to do on this particular coverage against this particular offensive set? And then are you ready to lead when you talk about what you have to do as far as, releasing the curl so you can get to the flats, right? And I think just at its core, to me, those three pillars speak to what you're saying as far as accountability. The beauty of sports is you can't talk about it. You can't just talk about it. You've got to show up and physically show up with the mindset of what you said your why is and how are you living that why. And that's what I appreciated a great deal. And I was very fortunate to start my career off at Florida Citrus Sports, where I could see the locker room, and then I could look up and see that window to the boardroom. And how can I make those two things similar, right?
Right. Connect. Yeah, it's what's crazy is now I wasn't that good of an athlete. I wasn't really an athlete when I was an athlete. So one of the things you said, and it ties back to that failure resiliency. As a DB, if you get burnt, you got to forget about that play
Yes.
and move on to the next play, right? Now, if you're anything like me, you might have got burnt on the next play too. But you keep on moving and you stay out there, you stay in the moment, and you keep playing. I want to ask you something. Last question here, and then we'll wrap. One of the sayings in a book that I was able to put together with a former graduate assistant of mine, a guy named Will Baggett, who's doing very well, is in order to be successful, you have to walk with elephants. And that means that you see what elephants are doing. The leaders in the industry are elephants of the industry, elephants of the profession. If you're around them, you learn how they operate, how they talk to each other, what they do in order to be successful. You and I had a conversation offline about that. And I want to ask you, I guess, about being perceptive. Maybe you're not in the leadership role, but maybe you're around leaders. And what can you pick up from leaders as you continue on with your career? Talk to us a little bit about that and how that has helped you throughout your career.
Yeah, I got a chance early in my career to be around some really influential coaches, to see them up close, not just, the SEC and Big Ten football coaches that was playing in an All-Star game, but also, when we hosted 2-day practice with Tampa Bay and Miami Dolphins, and being able to see Tony Dungy up close and Rich McKay, the owner, up close, and the All-Star game that we used to do with Don Shula and Chuck Noll and Lindy Infante, may they rest in peace, up close. You begin to try to steal some things and then try to piece some things together. I got a great piece of advice. They said, we're going to invite you to this meeting. You won't have a speaking role, But here's one way to take advantage of this opportunity of being in the room, right? Uh, Listen to the questions that's being asked and take notes of it. And then the follow up question that's being asked by the movers in the room, because they'll give you some insight on how they think. And now better help you when you get the opportunity to play a role in the meeting, how to position your case or make your point that taps into what's important to those people. But the best piece of advice was your why should be your moral compass. And I've been fortunate enough to be led by that during the tough times as well as during good times when get the opportunity to be engaged with student athletes and coaches, and we're all moving in the same direction. But your point about being a defensive back and having a bad memory, you're exactly right. The thing that I would add is, you got to play to your strengths, right? And I'll be like, when you are going through that process of scouting, you know what's across from you, right? And so you know that if the backpedal is not what it needs to be, I say, Coach, I need to get into that half turn because Hassan Graham can run.
In real life, it's called preparation, right? All I was doing was learning how to prepare in real life to know what I'm dealing with when it comes up to me.
Exactly.
This has been an excellent conversation, Anthony. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Thank you.
That was Anthony Azama. He is the Director of Athletics at Washington University in St. Louis. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.